Matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the Vickery, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show, the only politics show being broadcast on British TV this morning. So don't go anywhere because I'm going to be interviewing in an exclusive. We call these things exclusive because he hasn't done any broadcast, but he has been asked to speak to the newspapers this week because of what's gone on with that crooked house pub. We've got the Mayor of West Midlands, Andy Street, to try and answer some of the questions about whether there's actually something crooked about what's happened in Dudley. Also, we've got another GB News broadcast exclusive, all of the exclusives this morning, because we're going to be showing you an interview that's been done by the US documentary filmmaker Daphne Barak. And she's spoken to Democratic presidential hopeful Robert Kennedy Jr., son of the former US Attorney General and Senator Bobby Kennedy. Of course, he's also the nephew of JFK. He'll be speaking to us in detail about where he was on the day that he found out that his uncle had been assassinated. Immigration is obviously going to be a key theme this morning. We've got another tragic case of drownings in the Channel, and I'm going to be speaking to the Australian Foreign Minister, the former Australian Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, about what's been going on, because he wrote this formative report on how to control our borders, and clearly that's not happening at the Home Office. I'm also going to be speaking to Labour's former Northern Ireland Secretary Sean Woodward about this mass data breach that's gone on with the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And I'm going to be speaking with former Defence Minister Sir Gerald Howarth and GB News' own Michael Portillo about the threat from China, what's going on with Ukraine and Russia and all of the rest of it. So it's a jam-packed show. Do not move. Let's go through the papers first of all and take you through the headlines. As you can imagine, immigration is a key theme. So the Sunday Telegraph splashes, ministers want more barges for asylum seekers. Would you believe, after what's gone on with Bibi Stockholm? Sunday Times goes with, actually, this is one exception, and this is because the A-level grades are coming out this week. Tougher A-level grading vital to halt university dropout surge. The Observer, Channel boat deaths prompt fresh anger over asylum policy. Mail on Sunday, pointing the finger across the Channel, was French patrol boat to blame for migrant drownings? It asks. Sunday Express, this probably sums up your emotions about it, really. For pity's sake, stop the boats. This has gone slightly off-piste. Sun on Sunday, Holly's 1 million ITV payday. Nice work if you can get it, for Holly Willoughby. And Sunday Mirror, how many more must die before Tories get a grip? Well, let's see if the Tories can get a grip on this issue. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Chris Hope to you all, and you'll be familiar with Christopher Hope, my former colleague at The Telegraph, now our incoming GB News political editor, also known as Chopper, if I may call you that.
That's OK, Camilla.
Why not? Maintain that nickname while you're here. You're going to get started this week. It's your first week at GB News.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
To the Madhouse.
Good to be here. Hello, viewers.
Lovely to see you. Right, let's whip through some of these boat stories then, Chris, because what a week it's been for the government. Stop the boats week. I mean, stop the negative headlines would be a better way of launching this campaign. It's been an absolute disaster, hasn't it?
Yes, they've tried to run before they can walk, I think. I mean, let's start with the really sad news overnight of the drownings in the Channel.
Yes, just horrific.
The Mail Sunday is saying here that they maybe was a French vessel watching this boat, and what are the French doing? And that, there was a human tragedy at the heart of these stories.
But there's always a human tragedy, isn't there? At the heart of this whole thing, you know, smugglers are making an absolute fortune on the backs of people being sent across the Channel in barely inflatable dinghies. Got all of this government rhetoric, and yet still we're months in, years into a Tory government that hasn't been able to get a grip of this issue.
At all. I think what's interesting in the Sunday Telegraph front page there about these barges, the Bibi Stockholm, of course, the mistake they made there was going too early on it. They should have flushed the water out, make sure it's all clean and there's no risk of Legionnaires. But I think this idea that they want to get more barges, the Telegraph here reporting several could be in place in smaller ports around the country. That's really interesting, I think, because this is, for me, going to the next 12 to 18 months, it's all about what would Labour do if they're in power. If the Tories can establish maybe 3 or 4 or 5 barges around the country, they'll become a focus for the next election. What would Labour do? Would Keir Starmer remove those barges and put them back in hotels?
But didn't
and then it's an attack line for the Tories.
Stephen Kinnock, who's the Labour spokesman on these issues, said last week that he thought that they would keep the barges because if they were in government, they would need to keep the existing infrastructure.
That's interesting.
The lack of solution from Labour, he's done this op-ed in the Mirror. It's basically saying, we need to cooperate more with the French and we need to stop the smuggling gangs and we need to disincentivise people from coming here. I'm thinking, well, isn't that what the government's proposing and you're opposing it?
Well, they're so similar, the two parties, that I think differentiation is the theme of the next 12 months. At the moment, we're putting up migrants who come here illegally in hotels. How does that look in France? Go to Britain and live in a hotel. That's how it appears.
How does it look like to the electorate here? They hate it.
Quite right, and we're paying for it. And you can't even go on a holiday in Britain because the hotel might be full already. That's a problem.
We talk about whether there's a difference. Maybe there's only a fag paper between Sunak and Starmer because there's some interesting analysis in the Mail on Sunday. I quite like how they've done this polling because normally polling is quite boring. And what kind of questions have they asked the people that they've surveyed here?
Yeah, and it says Sunak's a long way behind, 17 points behind Starmer. They say here that voters would rather spend a long car journey or a night out with Starmer, not Sunak. Now, I've been in the car a lot.
Can I just say, slight Hobson's choice that. Would you like to have a car journey or indeed a long night out with either of them? I mean, my goodness me.
The government's 30% think the government's handling the economy very badly. That's bad for Sunak. They are saying things here that we know. They're saying here that Sunak will be a good boss of a company.
Yeah,
but less
you'd
good
be
as
better
prime.
with your money.
And I think he's got to learn politics on the job.
Quite an interesting Boris question in there. It asks Tory voters particularly whether they'd be more likely to vote for the Tories if Boris was still in power. And the people, I think it's 29% said they'd vote for Sunak, and then it goes up to 31% for Boris.
Yes.
So the blonde still looms in the background.
And he knows it.
Doesn't he just?
There.
I know, it's
And also on net
unbelievable.
zero, it's very popular. More than half like it, but 3/4 won't install a heat pump, which says all about net zero.
This is the problem, right? People are in support of this. I mean, not least because the British are very good at recycling and all the rest of it, but they don't want to paying thousands of pounds for new cars and heat pumps. That's right. Let's go on now to Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, who's been in a number of the papers. He's done an interview. I just thought it was worth pointing out this really good piece in the Telegraph, Chris. 3 months of surgery in 5 days. Basically, this has been pioneered by Guys and Thomases.
Yep.
Clearly, they've got a massive breast cancer backlog. And a consultant there, because Mr Ahmed, I believe he's called, Imran Ahmed, has basically said that you should condense all of these operations into a few days and get them done. This is a positive story. Why can't this be rolled out?
It's rethinking how you deal with waiting lists. There's a guy called Professor Tim Briggs who has an idea called Get It Right First Time in NHS. The point is all these hospitals are doing the same thing all the time. Learn the best practice and do it.
Yeah.
And that idea of using technology, using clever ways of working, just literally blitzing one part of the waiting list and moving to the next part sounds very intelligent.
Basically, they had concurrent operating theatres so that they didn't need to wait for people to go in. Somebody's having the anaesthetic, somebody's being operated on, switch. I mean, to clear a 3-month backlog in 5 days, God.
The problem for me with the NHS is politics is always involved. It should be taken out. Ideally, for the patients, they're the most important people. It should be removed from politics, and it isn't. But that's what we see here in the Mail. Steve Barclay talking about how to let Labour NHS patients in Wales use the English waiting list.
And then he's having a go at Labour running the NHS in Wales and saying the waiting lists are even
Theresa May
longer.
was Prime Minister.
Let's have a quick chat about whether there are too many rats in Parliament, Chris.
Well, apparently there are, although I've never seen any, not any actual rodents. I've seen many MPs who are rats, of course, haven't we, Camilla? But there were lots of mice, but apparently, according here, they can't. It's an unsuitable environment for a moggy, according to the Battersea dog.
Well, I mean, they haven't met my cat, Baroness Lionel of Blair, who is basically a serial killer.
Yes.
Something is killed almost on a daily basis.
Yes.
I saw Larry a couple of weeks ago. I happened to go into number 10.
Yes.
Larry is just lying about on the rug.
Yes.
Doing not
overfed cat.
Not mousing anything.
I found if I was
way.
working late at the Telegraph in room 12 or room 10, if I didn't move, the mouse would appear. So I'd be making flapping noises.
When you say room 10, you're talking about where all the journalists hang out in the Houses of Parliament. There are mice just flying around.
Yeah.
But isn't it also because journalists are a bit filthy and they leave out sandwiches?
Yeah, we
and
do.
Things?
We just dribble. And leave
Paperwork.
crumbs.
Yeah, horrible. Now, slight segue just to another story that pricked my interest. There's this image of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Tell me about it, Chris, because I'm intrigued by this image. Showing this thing on her wrist that seems to be what?
Yes. Well, apparently it is a biosignal processing disc.
Right.
On the veins on the inside of her left hand, which she was showing. A camera was nearby. The camera caught it.
What I find interesting about this image is, I don't know if we can zoom in on it, but isn't it interesting how one of her sleeves is turned down to reveal this mental health disc and the other sleeve isn't?
That's right.
Could she have known she was being photographed?
No, she may not have known. It is. We think it's taken by someone called Backgrid, which could be a paparazzi.
Very famous paparazzi agency in LA,
costs, £235 to nearly £3,000 a year.
And it tells you your mood and it helps you to de-stress.
And some of us can't afford gym membership.
Well, as you're starting at GB News, maybe you should invest in one of these discs.
Yes.
Just to make sure you're fine as you make this foray into broadcasting.
Yes.
Chris, we wish you all the very best. Looking forward to seeing you on air this week.
That's right, yes.
OK,
Thank you, Camilla.
good luck with everything.
Good to be here.
Christopher Hope, our new political editor, ladies and gentlemen. Now, from one political correspondent to another, let's join Olivia Utley now, who I believe is in Leamington Spa, with the People's Panel. Olivia, what would they like us to ask our guests today? Lovely to see you.
Hello, lovely to see you too, Camilla. Yes, I am here in rather rainy Leamington Spa today with our fantastic People's panel. I've been having a great chat with them this morning. They've got some really, really good questions for your panellists this morning. So I'm looking forward to introducing you. But first, we are very lucky to be hosted in the beautiful Temperance Cafe in Leamington Spa. And I'm here with the owner, Adrian. And Adrian, how's business going for you?
Good morning. Well, we haven't had a great few years, obviously, with cost of living crisis and COVID, lockdown and everything. But we're doing okay now. We're open at least, and that's a big improvement.
I can imagine, and fantastic selection of teas you've got. Very exciting.
I think we had 50 last time I counted.
50 teas. Really, really good. Lovely to be here. And Adrian, are there any challenges that your business is facing at the moment that perhaps the government could help with?
Well, they could fix the economy. That would help. The cost of living crisis obviously affects, the hospitality businesses around the country, many of whom are unfortunately having to close. So the energy prices is probably affecting us the most.
I can imagine, and I know that lots of small businesses across the country are struggling with the same problem. So yeah, Rishi, if you could just fix the economy for Adrian, that would be lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really, really grateful. Thank you. And now over to our brilliant People's panel. Today we've got Catherine, we've got Stephen and we've got Tony. Catherine, I'm going to start with you. You had a really interesting question, I think, for one of our guests in particular. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yes, Alexander Downer. I would like to ask him how he would manage the UK through the immigration system, legally and illegally, how he would deal with Europe on the same system to run through the UK, because it's not just the UK that has the problem.
Because obviously Australia has done a fantastic job of stopping the migrant crisis there. So essentially you're sort of looking for tips and tricks that the UK and Europe could take from Mr. Downer?
Yes, I don't believe we could use the same process on turning the boats back, but the boats are one of the big issues, but not the main issue.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm sure Camilla will be talking to Alexander Downer about that crisis in the Channel now. And Stephen, what about you? What questions do you have for our panel? I know you're a business owner, so the state of the economy at the moment is really affecting you.
Yes, it is. We need to get some investment back into youth training, particularly to do with solar energy and net zero. I don't believe this country can actually afford the direction we're travelling at the moment in relation to net zero. I think it needs to be slowed a little bit. I think there needs to be more investment in youth, training people to come through to support the businesses, because there isn't the people available that are trained to deliver what we need to deliver.
Thank you very much, and you're not the only one who thinks that, certainly. And Tony, what about you? We were talking a little about net zero earlier. How do you think the net zero agenda's going? Do you trust Labour or the Conservatives to fix our energy woes?
That's a difficult one, of course. I don't think anybody can, but what I would like to do is I'd like to ask Andy Street why we can't put solar panels on top of our car parks. Because if we did that, we would reach net zero quicker than others, but more importantly, we would stop putting solar panels over our fields, which is affecting our agricultural service. So we can do two things at once, and we get the benefit of having lots and lots of energy that is not carbon. It's carbon neutral. That to me is really important. So I'm really, really keen to find a way to make certain we can reach net zero without damaging the country.
Thank you very much. And I think that concern is echoed all around the country. So many people who are very keen to get to net zero, to reduce our carbon emissions, but are worried that the way we're going at the moment, it's going to hit the poorest hardest and not actually be that effective. So there's just a snapshot of what people in Leamington Spa are saying this morning. But back to you in the studio, Camilla, for now.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Olivia. Great questions there that I'll put to my guests. Don't forget, by the way, if you want to apply for the People's Panel, go to gbnews.com/panel. It's that simple. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by former Labour and Tory MP, because he defected to Labour from the Tories, and former Northern Ireland Secretary Sean Woodward now. Sean, lovely to speak to you this morning. Obviously, the first question I've got for you in your capacity as former Northern Ireland Secretary is to discuss this dreadful hack that's gone on with Police Service Northern Ireland. 10,000 officers' details have been compromised. I mean, do we think that there's a question of police officers' safety now being in danger because of this, Sean?
There could be. And the short answer, Camilla, is we don't really know. Following a request for freedom of information, a terrible error was made in the Police Service of Northern Ireland adding to the request what's called source data, which meant that actually the surnames, initials, and the departments in which 10,000 police officers in Northern Ireland suddenly found online their details had been posted. Now, in Northern Ireland, a lot of policemen go to work every day not dressed in their uniforms. So men and women leave home in plain clothes. Their neighbours don't know what they go to do. They've had to keep their work secret in order to protect themselves and their families. The risk here is that some of those people's identities have been compromised. We don't know enough. It's a statement that so far has come from the Chief Constable, which is that they're investigating it. The Chief Constable returned from holiday, had a meeting with the oversight body in Northern Ireland that looks at these issues. Some people wanted the Chief Constable to resign. The Chief Constable said he didn't think it would be helpful to resign.
Do you think he should resign?
The Chief Constable... Well, the point about resignation is, does it actually do anything? I mean, right now, we need somebody to find out what's going on, and I'm not sure it would actually help if, because of a mistake, the Chief Constable leaves his job, leaving nobody at the top of the tree to try and sort out what is actually happening and to protect the officers concerned.
There's already
so probably that's the right decision for now, but maybe the Secretary of State might make a statement on this, because this is one of those areas where, because of power sharing not working properly in Northern Ireland, there undoubtedly is a vacuum that needs to be filled. And what we need, you need, your viewers need to know, is, are police officers right now in danger, and what is being done to protect them?
Yes. We'll get on to power sharing in just a moment. The other question I was going to ask is, there's already talk in today's newspapers about some of these police officers suing the police service in Northern Ireland. I mean, you can't blame them, can you? This is an extraordinary breach of their data. As you've said, it compromises their safety. Do you support the idea that there should be a class action?
Well, what I support at the moment is actually knowing how much in danger these police officers are. Let's be frank about this. If it's no good getting money if somebody subsequently loses their life because their identity has been compromised. And I think, however understandable it is, and I'm sure there are lawyers out there ambulance chasing, as it's called right now, trying to put this class action together, what really needs to happen right now is the Police Service of Northern Ireland, those responsible in Northern Ireland, the Secretary of State here needs to get a grip on actually what's happened and protecting people. And after we've protected them, let's worry about suing people for mistakes. But what we need to do right now is protect people who, in my experience, as I think Labour's longest serving Secretary of State, found these men and women to be extraordinary public service people.
Yes.
And we owe a huge debt to them for protecting the people of Northern Ireland, whatever their denomination.
I think we understand that a Roman Catholic police officer has already moved his family out of Northern Ireland because of the data breach. As you say there, you're the longest-serving Northern Ireland Secretary. How do you characterise, at the moment, relations between Republicans and Loyalists in the district?
Well, I think people have still got to be congratulated on the achievement now of more than 25 years of the political process and the peace process working. There have been huge challenges in recent months and years, not least the fact that now for a year and a half, there has actually been no power sharing vehicle up and running in Northern Ireland. And the politicians, not least the DUP, really do need now to get back into government and start working together, because wouldn't it be better now if the executive was functioning in Northern Ireland, and they were the people talking to you about what should be happening.
Yes.
And again, all I have to say here is the Secretary of State has a responsibility to get this all working. And I think it's a great shame that we've actually seen the absence of the Secretary of State yet again in the last few days, when I would like to have seen more of them. And I think it's been interesting that the Taoiseach in the Republic of Ireland has been a very visible presence in the last few days, trying to talk to the parties and get them working again.
Let's speak about Leo Varadkar, because he said this week that if the Stormont power-sharing institutions can't be re-established in the autumn, well, then I do think at that point we will have to start having conversations about alternatives, about Plan B. What would Plan B look like in your mind, Sean?
Well, that's a very, very good question, because I was, as you know, Camilla, very pleased when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister of our country. I'm a Labour politician, but he is our Prime Minister at the moment. I hope that changes, but he is who we've got. And unlike Boris Johnson, he put a huge amount of effort into Northern Ireland at the start of his time as Prime Minister. Now, since that time, he's made promises that he would get the executive up and running again. And I think he has been somewhat distracted by all the other problems he's got from actually making progress on that. So Plan B requires the British Prime Minister to get in there with the Irish Taoiseach and everybody else to find a way to get a resolution. Now, I presume what Plan B means is finding a way for the Irish government and the British government to be working together to find a way to get the institutions still in Northern Ireland up and running, and that might be bringing about elections.
Yes.
But again, what I really feel here is what's missing is what we saw under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and less so increasingly with Conservative Prime Ministers. We need the engagement of the British Prime Minister. It doesn't matter whether they're Tory or Labour. The British PM needs to be in there making these people work together. And a combination of money, legislation, and time, and that's the crucial thing, time. Time is what is missing from the British Prime Minister's agenda in Northern Ireland.
You mentioned Tony Blair there. Obviously, you worked under Blair and Brown. I'm intrigued by the story on the front of the Sunday Times, Sean. I wondered if you'd comment. Blair Institute kept advising Saudi government after Khashoggi's murder. That's a misjudgment from Tony Blair, isn't it?
Well, you and I suspect every viewer watching this programme, will have been sickened by the death of Mr. Khashoggi and what we learn about the circumstances behind that.
Yeah.
As I understand it, and I don't work for the Tony Blair Institute, but the decision was made not to cancel a contract that was in play with the Tony Blair Institute and the Saudi government at the time.
Misjudged, though?
Now, the Saudi government is modernising. That doesn't for one second condone what happened in Turkey with the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. But what you and I know, Camilla, you have to ask yourself is the rhetoric and a sudden action is easy. So, for example, if the Chief Constable of Northern Ireland had resigned, would that have made any difference to protecting police officers today? So if everybody had withdrawn from communications with the Saudis, would that have helped? And an obvious example here.
But was it wrong, Sean, to carry on with this funding?
Cost of energy and petrol prices. Would, for example, withdraw from every cooperation with Saudi Arabia after the death of Khashoggi.
Okay.
And let's say the Saudis cutting oil production as a response would have further belt on the cost of living crisis.
Okay. Sean.
Do anything to help people in Britain.
OK, thank you. Sorry, we're going to have to leave it there, but lovely to speak to you this Sunday. Thank you very much indeed. Lots more to come in just a minute. I'm going to be speaking to the Mayor of West Midland, Andy Street, about the shocking destruction of that famous Crooked House pub in Staffordshire. All that after the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. I'm Marco Patagna. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office. We'll see a mixed bag of weather across the UK over the next 24 hours or so, a mixture of sunshine and showers with more persistent rain arriving later from the southwest. Back to the detail for today though. Plenty of showers around towards the north and west of the UK today. Some of them on the heavy, potentially thundery side, particularly towards the north and northeast of Scotland. More in the way of sunshine down towards the south and east between those showers. And that will allow temperatures to climb into the low 20s Celsius, peaking in the southeast at around 22 or 23 degrees. Notice though the rain gathering down towards the southwest of the UK, and that will start to push its way in from the southwest as we go through this evening into the overnight period. Some of that turning quite heavy, potentially even thundery in nature as it makes progress further into England and Wales by the morning on Monday. To the north and northwest though, we do see some clear spells, but also a scattering of showers. And wherever you are, it's a pretty warm night once again. Temperatures holding up in the teens Celsius, 13 to 16 degrees, 16 down towards the southeast is a pretty muggy 61 in Fahrenheit. As for Monday itself, well, we'll see a pretty unsettled day across England and Wales. Some quite heavy, even thundery bursts of rain at times, again moving in from the southwest as we go through the day, whereas towards the north and northwest for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a brighter picture, but here too a scattering of showers. And temperatures a little bit academic given the pretty unsettled weather across the south of the UK, peaking in the high teens towards the north and down to
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, in just a moment, joining me in the studio will be the Mayor of West Midlands, Andy Street, and then former Australian Foreign Minister Alexander Downer will be discussing the small boats crisis. Stay tuned for all of that after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Camilla, thank you and good morning to you. The top story from the GB newsroom is that the government is under renewed pressure to tackle the migrant crisis after 6 people died crossing the English Channel yesterday. Campaigners have described the incident as an appalling and preventable tragedy, while MPs from all parties are calling for action to stop criminal gangs profiting from the dangerous journeys. 59 people were rescued by British and French coastguards yesterday after an overloaded vessel carrying migrants got into difficulty off the coast of France. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has described the incident as a tragic loss of life and confirmed she chaired a meeting with Border Force team officials.
Not a lot of people do know what the options for safe legal routes are. But of course, we use humanitarian visas with the Ukrainian situation. People were brought here safely and legally, never having to navigate the asylum system or get into a small boat. So it can be done. We do have mechanisms available, but they're very, very narrow, and they don't catch everyone that is allowed to be here. So we know now that nothing is going to work, nothing is going to deter people. We need to start looking at how we get them here safely and process them quickly.
So that was comment there from Kay Marsh, who is a manager and support coordinator at a migrant charity called Samfire. Now, Labour has pledged to recruit more than 6,500 new teachers in a plan to tackle regional recruitment gaps. Supply teacher spending has doubled in the last year, and Labour says that its recruitment plan to create more opportunities for young people would more than fill teacher vacancies and temporarily filled roles, giving stability for children worst affected by teacher vacancies. And Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says that ending tax breaks on private schools will put money into teacher recruitment.
Have to re-establish teaching as a really valued and respected profession in our country, and Labour's plans would deliver more teachers into our classrooms. We would end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy and put that money into recruiting more teachers. But alongside that, all of the different incentive payments and bursaries that are currently available, we want to simplify that to make it more effective in keeping teachers in the classroom.
And the government is to bring forward changes to regulations around single-sex toilets in public spaces. All new non-domestic public and private buildings will be required to provide separate single-sex toilets for women and men, or a self-contained private toilet as a minimum. Women and Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch says gender-neutral toilets has removed the right for privacy in public facilities, and the new regulations will protect the dignity and safety of all. You're watching GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. This is Britain's news channel. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, don't go anywhere because I'm about to talk to the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. I'm then going to be joined in the studio by Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer. Will this government ever be able to stop the boats? I'll be asking him that a little later. And in a GB News broadcast exclusive, we'll be showing an interview by US documentary filmmaker Daphne Barak of Robert Kennedy Jr., son of former US Attorney General and Senator Bobby Kennedy, and nephew, of course, of former US President John F. Kennedy. But first, I'm absolutely delighted to say that the Mayor of West Midlands, Andy Street, joins me in the studio now. Andy,
good morning.
Thank you very much for making the journey south to come and speak to us today. Look, we've got to start with this Crooked House pub.
Oh, yeah.
It's on your patch. I know you've been quite vocal about it. I appreciate that there is a police investigation being carried out, but it's been put to me by a correspondent this morning that there is something that seems a little more crooked about this than just the pub.
So we do have to respect the police inquiry, and of course the local authority also investigating, because they're the planning authority, they're the ones with the powers to act over a rebuild. But you are right, there's two underlying points here. The local people are really outraged by this. They see this as an attack on their heritage, their history, and particularly people in the Black Country are very, very proud of that. But then the other underlying point is there sufficient legal protection for buildings like this? And I think it's for those two reasons that this is becoming a story of national significance, even international significance, because people feel they're two underlying important points.
People who are watching the show were just showing some images of this pub being burnt out. That was before it was razed to the ground with a digger that apparently had been booked before the pub even burnt down. If you're listening on the radio, we're just seeing images of the burnt out shell of this building, and then lo and behold, it's then razed to the ground, seemingly without anyone being able to stop it. I've read reports about the pathway or the road to the pub being blocked by huge mounds of soil. Something seems extremely fishy about the entire thing. I think from the public's perspective, they're asking themselves two questions. First of all, how on earth is this able to happen? How could those diggers have got in and done this without seemingly anyone's permission? Point one, Andy. And point two, what legal redress does anyone locally have?
Yeah.
You've talked about this pub being rebuilt brick by brick. How can you enforce that?
Yeah, OK, so they are the points, you're right. So what is a statement of fact is that there was no permission to demolish this pub. Very clear. Permission has to be given by the local authority for a demolition to occur. That permission was not given. So, in a sense, that's an established fact. We've got to then follow through the consequences of that. Now, when I say the pub must be rebuilt brick by brick, clearly that's the local requirement, but there are also precedents for that in law. There's a wonderful story of a pub in Maida Vale in London, the Carlton Tavern, that was knocked down without permission, was rebuilt brick by brick. Of course, it's going to be rather more difficult with a very quirky building like this, but that's the ambition, because it's almost like a principle that we cannot see heritage erased in this way.
I mean, when you talk about it being rebuilt, are you saying exactly in the form that it was before? Because obviously it was crooked as a result of subsidence. It would have to be built in a very unique and perhaps peculiar way to recreate the magic. But is that what your vision is for this?
Well, this is going to be very hard, isn't it? And we're perhaps a little further through the story
but
here.
Just ideally, because I know this is what the people want.
It is indeed, and then ideally that should be so. But we've got to just face reality. It's going to be rather challenging to get exactly the quirkiness. But the mission that we set out with, and the local authority who have the power to demand this, are in exactly the same place. I've had discussions with them this week, and that is what we're setting out to do, because it matters as a precedent, a principle.
And what about the owners then? It's difficult, this, isn't it? It's sold by the Marston Brewery to private individuals. We don't quite know what their involvement is with any of this. As you say, it's being investigated by the police. The police are also looking at a potential arson case, so it's quite complicated. But can they be forced to have to rebuild the pub on their own land that they own, because it's a diktat from somebody in central government or some other body? Can that actually happen? Is it feasible, this, Andy?
So we are, of course, just going through the detail of the law, and it's why it's so interesting. What's the power in the law? But my understanding is that the local authority have the power to enforce that. But that's just been worked through, and we must give time for the local authority to actually do their investigation and determine that, because this is quite technical legal stuff. But that is my hope. To be clear as well, another point, Marston sold that pub very legally, fine. So there is an underlying point to the citizens watching, thinking this is terrible. Support your local pubs as well. This is an obvious point. They sold it because it wasn't trading well. It's a hard thing to acknowledge, but it's true. So let's support these heritage buildings.
What can the good people of Dudley do to help you to ensure, because you seem very determined that this pub is going to be rebuilt?
So I'm very determined because of what the good people of Dudley have said, actually. So I would say to anyone watching from Dudley or indeed the other local areas, your voice has been heard. You've done something really powerful this week. You've said, this is our history. We're going to defend our history. We're proud Black Country people. We know of our history. They've done that. Now they have to leave the local authority and the police force and the fire service to do their investigations. And I know patience is a hard thing to ask for, but it is what's required.
We need it in this case. Thank you very much on all of that, Andy. Let's move to the West Midlands then and tell me, how are things going? Obviously, we've got the government's levelling up agenda. Are the government levelling up places like the West Midlands? I know you've been a bit critical of this kind of begging bowl culture around some of the funding.
Yeah.
What's the situation for you?
So it's moved on since that. That was back in about March when I was critical of the begging bowl culture, as I called it, and the idea there was a small pots of money allocated by government through the Levelling Up Fund, and I didn't believe that was the best way of achieving investment into the West Midlands or indeed anywhere else. But actually, there's been a big move since then, and it sounds a bit technical, but the government have now agreed a devolution deal with ourselves and Greater Manchester, a third deal, and in that they actually moved to transferring large amounts of cash and power and decision-making. And the principle, there's never enough, is there? But there's a large amount. But the principle is that we take the decisions locally about how we're going to spend that. They call it a single pot. So we take those trade-off decisions and make sure all of our energies around skills, transport, housing, they can sort of be coordinated locally. And that's a big breakthrough, because if we're deciding rather than asking for little bits from government, hopefully we can get a plan together.
Do you think that the country is being levelled up? Obviously, in the past, we've heard a lot about north-south divides. Not just north-south divides, maybe divides between prosperous cities, even in the north, and left-behind towns, particularly seaside towns. What do you think the picture is, Andy? Because I think there are people in the north, particularly following the fall of Boris Johnson, people who voted for Brexit who don't think that the government has delivered on those promises, the so-called red wall. There are people in those constituencies feeling really, really disillusioned. They feel politically lost.
So because this isn't just a north issue, this applies to the Midlands as well. And as you say, there are places in the south that would be described as, by some, as left behind. So it's not just a north issue. Our evidence of this is that pre-pandemic, we were doing very well. We were closing that gap. But actually, the pandemic has pushed our performance backwards, so it makes this agenda even more important. And actually what you see, because you talk about Boris, but what this government under Rishi and Jeremy Hunt have done, they are investing billions in areas outside of the south east. If I look at our experience, £1 billion for transport investments, huge money for developing skills, huge amount of money. Now, recent deal, £500 million more for building affordable homes. So the cash is being put on the table by the government, and what people on the ground want to see is actual delivery.
Now, you say that, and maybe when you talk about, you know, big cheques being written for infrastructure and other projects, for regeneration projects, that's great. But let's be honest, and I ask you also with your former John Lewis hat on, the High Street is suffering. We've heard this week that Wilko's,
Wilko, as it now is,
people will like to refer to it, is in administration, it's closing down. We've also had Nigel Farage's campaign about the banks on this channel, revealing that 1,000 bank accounts a day are being closed, that we're moving towards this cashless society that is closing out smaller businesses that deal in cash. I mean, you know as well as I do, because you must go shopping, boarded out high streets, inability to park where you want, LTNs and ULEZ making life difficult for the motorist. It's not contributing to, I would say, an aspirational sort of British town centre, is it?
No, it's very challenging at town centres, but
But the government should be doing more to help people, shouldn't they?
But they are already...
Well, small businesses, though, Andy, I think small businesses complain that they're not giving the support they need. I recall that you actually made a complaint about small businesses perhaps not being given as much help with their energy bills as householders.
That's true. So this issue still continues. So let's be fair to the government, first of all. The support for domestic energy users has been incredible, actually. But if you look at business support, I was vociferous earlier in the year, saying those who ended up with a high charge because of what happened at the end of last year, they're sort of locked into that. Now, a lot of work has been done. I've spoken personally with all of the energy companies about actually this sort of extending the contracts to enable people to bring the short-term price down and extend. But there are still some who are left with the high costs from last year. And I would like to see, straight answer, I would like to see more action on that, because that continues to be, particularly for hospitality businesses, that's very challenging.
What kind of action, though? I mean, I suppose one way to look at it would be that the corporation tax hike was a mistake. It's clobbered small businesses and it should be reversed.
So I would like to see the fund that's already been put on the table, £5 billion from the government for energy support for businesses at the moment, to be much more targeted. Not a little bit off everybody, but those who've got a real hike left beached by last year's arrangements, much more focus on those who really really need
and
it.
Business rate relief and corporation tax?
I've always believed that business rates are very, very challenging, and I would like to see a complete reform of business rates, because if you look at what's happening, the high street is paying disproportionately business rates, and other new forms of business probably pay a lot less. So there's a really big long-term issue there. Corporation tax, I would like to see it come down over time, but let's be honest, the government has got to manage its finances as well.
What would you like to see corporation tax be? Because we had somebody on the show last week saying, John Redwood, in fact, OK, Keith Thatcherite, but at the same time he said it should be 12.5% to match Ireland.
We were at about 19%. That was very competitive within the G7.
Like it
if we
back
could
at
get back to that very competitive position, and the government has been really clear, they want to get back to that when the public finances allow. And we can't deny that we're in a particularly difficult position, and good, sound finance is a Conservative principle.
One final question. The Commonwealth Games and the future of the Commonwealth Games is in jeopardy because Victoria have pulled out. We now hear that Alberta in Canada can't host 2030. Could Birmingham step in and save the day?
So the interesting phrase, the word in that question is could. Of course we could. A brilliant job was done across Birmingham and the West Midlands last year, and we've seen all the figures around inward investment, the brand of Birmingham around the world being enhanced by it.
So you'd like to host it?
The question is, should we? Should we?
Should you?
My answer to that at the moment is no. Because what the Commonwealth Games needs for its long-term success is for an Australian state to step forward, a Canadian state to step forward, and it wouldn't be quite the same if it was just in one location. Much as we, in a sense, would love to do it again, it's not yet the right answer.
Andy Street, lovely to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Give our love to the West Midlands when you return. Thank you
you
very much for your time. Now, we've got plenty more to come on today's show. Shortly, I'm going to be speaking to the longest-serving Foreign Minister of Australia, Alexander Downer. Don't forget, we've also got that exclusive interview with Robert Kennedy Jr. He's going to be discussing his political ambitions. He wants to take on Donald Trump, but he also talks to us about what it was like to find out that his uncle had been assassinated, and then, of course, years later, to find out that his father, Bobby Kennedy, had been killed in similar circumstances. But first, and before all that, let's discuss whether the government actually can stop the boats with Alexander Downer. Lovely to see you this morning.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Camilla.
Look, it's not a great weekend, is it? We've seen more deaths in the Channel. We've had this, I mean, I'd say it's a fiasco with the Bibby Stockholm having to be removed of migrants because of Legionnaires. It was meant to be the Stop the Boats week. Catherine, on our People's panel, wanted me to ask you, what can the government do to rescue this, I would say, shambolic approach to trying to stop the boats? Because it's not working, Alexander.
Well, at the heart of it is going to be third country processing of these asylum seekers, and so that is Rwanda.
I know, but then they've sent, as Labour have said, they've sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than actual deportees.
Well, they haven't sent any deportees to Rwanda, and I think 2 Home Secretaries have been to Rwanda, so 2 is more than naught. However, they just have to overcome the legal problems they have, one way or another. They have to do that. So it's now going to the Supreme Court. These court hearings and decisions, they just take forever. But they've got to be determined to pursue this whole Rwanda, as we call it, the Rwanda option, because you have to break the business model of the organised crime gangs who are bringing these people across. You have to break their business model. And it's as simple as this. The people, the asylum seekers, pay 3,000–4,000 euros per person to come across. If they know that they can't get to the UK or can't stay in the UK and will end up in Rwanda or anywhere else, they won't pay the 3,000 to 4,000 euros in the first place.
When
so
you tried
got
this,
to break that business.
When you tried it in Australia, and obviously you successfully put people off landing on Australian shores by processing them in Nauru, did you have all of these legal challenges? I mean, is the difference between us and you the ECHR? And the fact that we probably have to leave it in order to further our own
number one,
policy aims.
We anticipated there would be, what are here called lefty lawyers, lodging all sorts of cases. There would be a massive litigation. So we lined up the laws as best we could to avoid that, to make sure, because after all, the Parliament makes the law, not the lawyers. So the laws were substantially changed in Australia. I won't go into how we changed them. And secondly, it is a fair point where Australia is not part of the Europe, it's not part of the European Convention on Human Rights. The UK is. The Strasbourg court has expanded its remit very substantially over the last few years, and that is potentially, not for certain, potentially a major legal obstacle. But we'll see when the Supreme Court finally rules on this case. Yeah. But if the government wins in the Supreme Court, then more or less, figuratively, the next day, they can start sending people to Rwanda. I'd say the other thing is it's got to be comprehensive. Everybody who comes across on a small boat like this needs to know they'll end up in Rwanda. They all need to know that.
If we lose in the Supreme Court, do we then look at leaving the ECHR?
Well, it depends why the Home Office would lose in the Supreme Court. It would depend what the court said. It's possible that the law could be changed. It's possible that there could be some modification of the scheme in Rwanda. In extremis, I suppose the UK could leave the European Convention. That would be pretty dramatic to leave a convention like that. Yeah. Hopefully the legal problems can be solved without that being necessary.
I know that you did this review into our border force and you gave it to former Home Secretary Priti Patel. I just wouldn't mind your analysis of the Home Office. I mean, back in the day when he was Home Secretary, I think it was 17 years ago, John Reid said it wasn't fit for purpose. The phrase I'm always told about the Home Office is that it's a basket case. Do you agree with that? Does it need total reform, this department?
I know the Home Office reasonably well. It's 40,000 people. Some of them are geniuses and some of them aren't. So it has a very, very difficult job. Some of the work they do very well. Let's just take this issue of illegal migrants. Picking them up, bringing them in, processing them, understanding who has arrived, making sure people don't get here unaccounted for. They do a pretty good job.
Do they? I mean, we've got this historic high of 100,000 coming in by the Channel.
Over several years, though, since 2018.
But it's still much higher than it was pre-pandemic.
No, what they...
Seems like there's a complete lack of grip, actually, and a lack of distinguishing between people legitimately seeking asylum in this country and economic migrants.
Yes, come to that. So I think there's some of the functional things the Home Office does, it actually does quite well. It's easy to be critical, but I actually think some of the things they do quite well. Here is a real issue that I don't think is being addressed in the UK, and that is why do so many people who apply for refugee status have it granted in the UK? Yes. Where, I mean, I stand to be corrected, but I think something like 75% of all applications are approved by the Home Office, whereas in the EU, in a country like France, only about 35% of applications.
But this is the question. Is it because there are officials in the Home Office who are anti the government's own immigration policy and are ticking boxes and letting people in when they shouldn't?
I'm not sure it's the... No? I'm not sure of the answer to this, but it's possibly not the officials, it's possibly the law.
Yes.
And that the government hasn't sufficiently changed the law to define more strictly what a refugee is. Now, a refugee is meant to be somebody who is fleeing from persecution and looking for, if you like, protection, to use the word of the language of the Refugee Convention, looking for somewhere safe to go. That isn't the same thing as turning somebody into a migrant.
No.
And what the government is doing is making all people who apply for refugee status who have it granted, and we're not sure on what basis it is being granted, on what basis they're just fleeing a country that nobody likes, as distinct from them personally fleeing persecution. They're personally being persecuted, and then they're turned into migrants.
Yeah.
Whereas in Australia, one of the things we did was with people who were found to be refugees, we gave them temporary protection visas. We said, OK, we'll look after you for a year, and at the end of that year, we'll review your situation, and if back home the persecution has come to an end, there's political change or whatever has happened, and it's safe for you to go home, we'll send you back home. But our obligation is to protect you, not to convert you into a migrant. We have a separate program for migrants, and we decide who comes to Australia.
And that's what you'd recommend our government does, basically?
I would recommend they review a lot of these things that we've been talking about this morning. I think they should introduce temporary protection visas. I think the Home Secretary and other ministers, the Immigration Minister, need to look at the definition of refugees. Yeah. They need to look at the Refugee Convention, look at what the courts have been doing, and ask the question, why are so many applications being accepted in the UK, whereas they're being rejected in the EU? All of these questions, I think, are really important questions to follow through.
I mean, these are questions that have been facing the Tories for the last 13 years. But Alexander Downer, thank you very much indeed for your insight. Lovely to speak to you this morning. Some very good suggestions there. If only the Home Secretary and the Home Office would listen. I'm sure Robert Jenrick and indeed Suella Braverman will be saying they're doing all this, but it doesn't seem to be making much progress. Let's go back to Olivia in Leamington Spa and see what the People's Panel have made of the interviews this morning. Olivia.
Hello, yes, here in Leamington Spa we've been watching your interviews with a hawk eye, and I've seen a few laughs, a few smiles, a few shakes of the head from my People's Panel, so let's find out what they've got to say. Catherine, I'm going to start with you because you asked a really interesting question which Camilla put to Alexander Downer. What did you make of his response? Did you think there were tips that we could take from the Australians on handling the migrant crisis?
Yes, many tips, and I do think that we need to get some more information from him and go forward with many of his ideas.
What do you think about Britain leaving the Convention for Human Rights, the European Convention for Human Rights? Do you think that might be the only way to tackle the crisis now, or do you think that would be, as Downer suggested, a very dramatic step and maybe not necessary?
Dramatic, yes, but maybe it could be the only way that we break the cycle.
Yeah, I think there are plenty who agree with you, including quite a few cabinet ministers by the sounds of it. And Stephen, what about you? What did you make of those interviews that Camilla had with politicians there?
It's interesting about the levelling up. It will be interesting to see what happens in the West Midlands regarding funding, etc., for the youth, to be able to bring trainees through. That's really important, and we need to focus on that. So I'd be interested to even have a further discussion with the Mayor to see what we can do to bring some further funding into the youth.
He said that he felt that things had moved forward, that Rishi Sunak was really investing now properly in regions around the UK. As a business owner, not quite in Andy Street's patch, but very nearly, do you feel as though there's enough government investment in areas like Leamington Spa?
We've struggled over the last 18 months, 24 months to find investment for renewable schemes. It's very challenging. We've been in the cities, we've been local, areas, committees, and we found it very difficult to draw money into very, very sensible schemes for going zero carbon.
Thank you very much. Really interesting message for Andy Street and other regional politicians like him. And Tony, what about you? What did you make of those interviews?
Well, actually, I was most interested in the last interview and about the problems we've got with the Home Office, because I think he was right when John Reid, 15 years ago, said that there was something wrong with the Home Office, and we don't seem to have solved it. And I think the delay we're having in passing the refugees and deciding whether or not we can have them or not is just ridiculous, and that's got to be down to the Home Office, not down to the ministers. I don't think it makes any difference whether you're Labour or Conservative. At the end of the day, it's actually the ministry and people in the ministry who have got to sort themselves out.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think many people are a bit worried about a potentially very dysfunctional Home Office. Some of them are geniuses, some of them are not, is how Alexander Downer diplomatically put it. Well, that is what people of Leamington Spa on our People's Panel are thinking this morning. But now, back to you, Camilla, in the studio.
Thank you very much, Olivia, Catherine, Stephen and Tony. Great People's Panellists as ever. Don't forget, if you want to apply, gbnews.com/panel. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're going to be hearing a fascinating insight into one of America's most prominent political dynasties, a broadcast exclusive interview with Robert Kennedy Jr. That's all after this weather.
That warm feeling inside, from boxed boilers proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. Looking ahead, it stays rather unsettled. There'll be quite cloudy skies, Sunday showers, but it does start to turn warmer through the week. And looking at the bigger picture, low pressure still dominates at the moment, bringing wet and windy weather, but towards Wednesday, high pressure starts to build in. For the rest of Sunday, a fairly cloudy picture out there. Winds lighter than yesterday, less showers around too. Some of the showers could be heavy across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, but plenty of dry weather, though skies quite grey. There'll be a few glimmers of sunshine and that will lift temperatures to around 22 or 23 Celsius towards the southeast, generally the high teens to low 20s for most. Into the evening time, this area of low pressure starts to move in, wet weather spreading in to the West Country, parts of Wales later on in the evening, and then that slowly pushes north and eastward. Some really heavy rain developing across northern parts of Wales into northern England as we head into the early hours, staying dry across Northern Ireland and Scotland, and a fairly warm night across the board. So a wet start to Monday morning across England and Wales, heavy rain at times, slowly pushing north and eastwards. A Met Office warning in force for much of the day. Dry and brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with plenty of sunny spells but scattered heavy showers here, and temperatures under the cloud feeling quite cool, struggling to reach much above 17 or 18 degrees, 21 or 22 towards the southeast.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, agreed. My superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, US documentary filmmaker Daphne Barak has interviewed Democratic presidential hopeful Robert Kennedy Jr. in a GB News broadcast exclusive. Mr. Kennedy talks about the painful memories of the assassination of his father, former US Attorney General and Senator Bobby Kennedy, and uncle and former President J.F. Kennedy. This interview forms part of an upcoming documentary for the 60th anniversary of the assassination of JFK, and we're going to be playing segments throughout today's GB News programming.
When you decided to run, I mean, of course, you're coming from a family that your uncle was assassinated. It was a big shock for the nation, for the whole world. Then your father was assassinated. Did you have conversation with your wife, Cheryl, with your children? Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? I mean, it's normal, right?
I think all of it, everybody in my family is aware of the risk. But I think, life is filled with risks. So, and I think once Cheryl was convinced that there was a path to victory, and that I think she felt like, because I have a passion to do this, to solve some of these problems for our country, and I'm in a unique position to be able to do that, that she gave me the green light.
Now, do you remember, you were very young. You were probably 9 years old, right? When your uncle was assassinated. Do you remember how you found out about it?
I was picked up from school early that day. I went to Sidwell Friends School in Washington, D.C., and my mother picked us up early. And while we were leaving, we saw a man in front of the school lowering the flag to half-mast. And I asked my mother why he was doing that, and she said that a bad man had shot my uncle, had shot Uncle Jack. And I, then when I went home, my father was actually walking in the yard with the director of the CIA, John McCone. And he had been the first one to my house, because the CIA was only about maybe a half mile from our house in Hickory Hill. And the director came over every day and swam in our pool. And my father, he had appeared at our house. My father actually that day, the first call that he made was to the CIA, to the desk chief, and he asked him, he was in a in a state at the time, and he asked, did your people do this? And that was his first thought. Wow. And then he called Enrique Ruiz, who had been one of the commanders of the Cuban Brigade, and who was one of the brigade leaders who had remained very, very close to my father. And we saw him, he came to dinner often, he came on ski vacations with us. And he had fought alongside of Castro and then turned on him. And he had been part of the Bay of Pigs Brigade. And he was in Washington, D.C. at a hotel that day. And my father's next call was to him. And he said, did your people do this? And then when McCone came over, he asked him the same question as he walked in the yard. When we came in the driveway, my father left McCone and came up and hugged us, and then took us for a walk around the yard. And there was a cedar tree at the bottom of our yard, and we all stood under that together. And I, and hugged my dad, because we could see how upset he was that he was destroyed. And it took him many, many months to recover. He walked around like a ghost for several months after that. And then we brought him back to New York. I mean, we brought him to, the airport, which was extraordinary because there was 100. He hadn't used the police. He hadn't trusted the LAPD, and they were very racist at that time. And so he hadn't used them in his campaign, and he wouldn't use the. J. Edgar Hoover offered him the FBI, but he didn't want the FBI protection because he knew J. Edgar Hoover would be spying on his campaign and was telling Lyndon Johnson everything because Hoover hated my father and was very close to Johnson. And so he used, the Dallas Cowboys linemen and a few kind of former U.S. Marshals and former FBI people as security. And then when they had a convoy of hundreds of motorcycles from the motorcycle gangs around California who were following my father, and they all came out to the airport. And when we were taking off, they all came out on the runway. And I remember looking out of the window of the plane and seeing the motorcyclists try to stay at pace with the wing of the plane, and one of them getting blown off his bike by the power of the engine. And we came back to New York. We waked him at St. Patrick's. And I was one of the pallbearers. We waked him overnight, so we did an all-night vigil, and then I was one of the pallbearers the next day, and it was an extraordinary, moving ceremony.
This horrible day that your father is in a Los Angeles hotel and is being shot. At this point, you are 14, right? How did you learn about that?
Well, I was woken up. I was at that time going to Georgetown Prep School in Washington. I was woken up by a priest at around 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was told that there was a car waiting for me, and he didn't say why. And I went right to Hickory Hill, which was probably a 15-minute drive to our home. And people, were very upset. And I remember somebody saying that they were closing all the campaign offices. At this point, my father was not dead. And when they said they were closing the campaign offices, I understood for the first time that how badly he was injured. And then we went and got on Air Force 2, which is Hubert Humphrey, the vice president's airplane, as opposed to US-1, US-1, US-2. And we went to Los Angeles. And we went to the hospital, to Good Samaritan Hospital, where my father was. So I was with my father when he died.
Oh my God.
And then we brought him back to New York. I mean, we brought him to, the airport, which was extraordinary because there was 100. He hadn't used the police. He hadn't trusted the LAPD, and they were very racist at that time. And so he hadn't used them in his campaign, and he wouldn't use the. J. Edgar Hoover offered him the FBI, but he didn't want the FBI protection because he knew J. Edgar Hoover would be spying on his campaign and was telling Lyndon Johnson everything because Hoover hated my father and was very close to Johnson. And so he used, the Dallas Cowboys linemen and a few kind of former U.S. Marshals and former FBI people as security. And then when they had a convoy of hundreds of motorcycles from the motorcycle gangs around California who were following my father, and they all came out to the airport. And when we were taking off, they all came out on the runway. And I remember looking out of the window of the plane and seeing the motorcyclists try to stay at pace with the wing of the plane, and one of them getting blown off his bike by the power of the engine. And we came back to New York. We waked him at St. Patrick's. And I was one of the pallbearers. We waked him overnight, so we did an all-night vigil, and then I was one of the pallbearers the next day, and it was an extraordinary, moving ceremony, and inspiring and yet heartbreaking at the same time. And I remember while we were struggling with his coffin down the steps of St. Patrick's, a very, very large black woman collapsed on the steps, and then she was waving a handkerchief at him at the coffin and saying to him, "Oh, you've done your best. You've done your best." It was very. It was a moment that just, stabbed me in the chest.
That was US documentary filmmaker Daphne Barak interviewing Robert Kennedy Jr. as part of an upcoming documentary for the 60th anniversary of the assassination of JFK. If you want to see the full interview with Robert Kennedy Jr., go to gbnews.com. Now, don't go anywhere, because we've still got two of Margaret Thatcher's favourite MPs, Sir Gerald Howarth and Michael Portillo, to come. Back in a jiffy.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, ordinarily we have a generation gap in this segment, and I'm going to call this my panel of wisdom, because I'm joined by former Defence Minister Sir Gerald Howarth and former Secretary of State for Defence Michael Portillo. Is that fair enough, chaps? Panel of wisdom.
I think that's
entirely Let's get into some serious topics. Let's talk about the threat from China, because I don't know what your feeling is, Gerard, but I think there's been this sense to which the UK have underestimated the threat from China for quite some time. I know there's an ISC report saying exactly that, and that actually we look at Russia, but China's really the main threat that we're facing right now, particularly when it comes to cyber attacks and spying.
Well, Russia is the immediate threat, and if we do not ensure that Putin and his henchmen are expelled from the territory that they have seized unlawfully in Ukraine, that will send a very serious message to the rest of the world that the West is not resolved to deal with this form of international terrorism. And China will be looking on with great care. Xi has made it perfectly clear that by 2050, he expects Taiwan to be reincorporated in China, the People's Republic of China, by force or otherwise. He has been, for the past 10, 15 years, turning uninhabited atolls in the South China Sea into military bases, building up his armaments, and, of course, buying up all our technology, buying up resources throughout the world. The biggest copper mines are to be found in Afghanistan. China has bought all those up. And
buying up a lot of Africa as well.
Buying up a huge amount of Africa. And it is a very, very serious threat. And if we now find ourselves buying a load of cars from China, people think that MG motor cars, a friend of mine has bought one, says, oh, it's built in Britain. It's not. It's built in China, Thailand or India. And all the electronic devices could be a threat to us. And the international, the Committee on Security and Intelligence, probably the most authoritative committee in Parliament, found in 2013 that Huawei was a potential threat.
Yes.
So it's taken us 10 years really to recognise what the security.
So the government has been
out.
asleep at the wheel.
I think they've been keen to try to develop good relations with China in the hope that China would come on board. But it's an authoritarian state. It is engaged in cyber attacks.
But have the likes of Osborne and co, who cozied up to Xi Jinping, been naive?
I think that they were wishful thinking at the time. But the evidence now is crystal clear. And we would be very foolish if we did not recognise the threat that we face from them.
Let's bring Michael into the conversation. Do you think it's a case of when, not if, Xi Jinping invades Taiwan?
No, I don't think it's as clear-cut as that at all, because I think China's aspiration is pretty much to take over the world without firing a bullet, if at all possible. And I think that is very important. So how will it take over without firing a bullet? All the things that Gerald has mentioned, and then I would add to that the infiltration of British universities, which I think is extremely serious and must absolutely be put on the agenda. But if we're right that they prefer not to fire a bullet over Taiwan, then we have to make sure that it would be very difficult for them to occupy Taiwan. And I would say they're very important to shore up public opinion in Taiwan, because, of course, efforts will be made to undermine the support for the regime. Taiwan needs to receive the support and armaments that it needs. It is, after all, an island, and although China is an enormously powerful power, to invade an island across open sea puts you open to many hazards and casualties and could lead to a prolonged war in the way that Russia is involved in Ukraine. I don't think China wants any of those things. So I think there are all sorts of ways in which we can build deterrence into the situation, because I think China really would prefer not to fight a bullet, not to be involved in a prolonged campaign.
Gerald, back to you. As I've described you as a wise owl, can you give me perhaps 3 things you think that this Tory government should do in order to win the general election in 2024?
I'll give you one thing. I think they should adopt conservative policies.
Yes.
Sound money, strong defence, law and order at home, and help for those who genuinely cannot help themselves. There's no doubt you've been discussing with Alexander Downer, former Australian Foreign Minister, about the migrant crisis that we face, and that is an absolute imperative that we get that right.
Do you think that Rishi Sunak's administration is not Tory enough?
Well, my son-in-law is part of that administration.
I know.
He's the defence minister, so and I do have the opportunity of talking to him about these matters. It is pretty Tory, but I think it needs to be much more explicit. I think that increasing corporation tax to 25% was a big mistake. We're trying to attract inward investment, not repel it. And we face a very serious threat from a Labour Party, which is led by a man who was an arch supporter, the most left-wing Labour leader we've had since Michael Foot, in Jeremy Corbyn. So he represents a very serious threat. A wealth tax might be on the cards. tackle
VAT
second
on
homes,
schools,
VAT,
fees.
inheritance tax, the whole lot. This is a very red in tooth and claw Labour Party standing ready and waiting in the wings.
So
to
be careful
deal with
what you wish for, Gerald, I think.
Absolutely.
I must go to Michael quickly to find out who you've got on your show at 11.
We will be talking about the appalling leak of information in Northern Ireland,
Yes.
which is putting the police service in grave danger. We'll have an ethical debate about levelling up. Is it pointless? Should we not be trying to level up cities that are yesterday's cities? And we've got a marvellous man called Eric Kaufman who's coming on to talk about the origins of wokery and what may happen to societies where we presently have a white majority, but in the future we won't.
Wise words from two wise owls. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Looking forward to your show in just a moment, Michael. Now, I won't be back next week because I'm taking a well-needed holiday. Tom Harwood's going to be filling in for me. He'll be back next week at 9:30. And, of course, as I've just mentioned, up next is Michael Portillo. First, though, a bit of weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. Looking ahead, it stays rather unsettled. There'll be quite cloudy skies, Sunday showers, but it does start to turn warmer through the week. And looking at the bigger picture, low pressure still dominates at the moment, bringing wet and windy weather, but towards Wednesday, high pressure starts to build in. For the rest of Sunday, a fairly cloudy picture out there. Winds lighter than yesterday, less showers around too. Some of the showers could be heavy across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, but plenty of dry weather, though skies quite grey. There'll be a few glimmers of sunshine and that will lift temperatures to around 22 or 23 Celsius towards the southeast, generally the high teens to low 20s for most. Into the evening time, this area of low pressure starts to move in, wet weather spreading in to the West Country, parts of Wales later on in the evening, and then that slowly pushes north and eastward. Some really heavy rain developing across northern parts of Wales into northern England as we head into the early hours, staying dry across Northern Ireland and Scotland, and a fairly warm night across the board. So a wet start to Monday morning across England and Wales, heavy rain at times, slowly pushing north and eastwards. A Met Office warning in force for much of the day. Dry and brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with plenty of sunny spells but scattered heavy showers here, and temperatures under the cloud feeling quite cool, struggling to reach much above 17 or 18 degrees, 21 or 22 towards the southeast.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with